In the next 3 videos, I'm going to show you how to do some surfacing work on your box after you have it completed. And the first thing I'm going to talk about is smoothing it and getting it ready and prepped for surfacing. And the best way to do that is to get out any of the nicks or any of the markings in it. Kind of like how we did with the the cylinder. Use the sponge to get out any big markings in it. And I have a little nick in my box, so I want to fill that with clay. Just a tiny little bit of clay I can use to fill that in. Just a little bit of clay will fill in any larger dents in the piece. I think that's the only one that I have. Oh, I have another one. I have another one on this side. I think right here. So I'm going to fill that in with some clay. And I can use my sponge to smooth it down. Smooth down the corners. And for my box, I really want these corners to be pretty sharp, because that's the kind of aesthetic I want. If you want more rounded corners, you can figure out what works best for you to make the corners more rounded. Once I've done that, I can use the metal rib to start smoothing out the top of the sphere. And with the metal rib, you really want it to be clean, because otherwise it'll make markings in your clay. So you want to keep wiping it off. And it's really important that you try not to cut yourself with this, because this can be pretty sharp. So I'm just trying to take off any of that clay, because it looks like there's some markings on it. It could also be that my tool itself might be dented, which is possible. And it's easier to work on the turntable. It looks like I have probably a dent in my metal rib, so I'm going to switch over to my plastic rib. So I'm going to get this a little wet. And I'm going to smooth out the top of it. Yeah, that's a lot better. If your metal rib is making some marks in the clay, switch over to the plastic one. And I'm just going to go along it and smooth it out and get off any of the large chunks to prepare it for starting to surface. So you're going to spend maybe about 10, maybe 20 minutes just smoothing it out. Getting it nice and ready. So I'm going to work on that for a little bit, and in the next video I am going to show you how to do some slip trailing. So I'll see you in a little. So I've smoothed out my box to about where I want it to be, and a lot of the big bumps are out and it's pretty smooth. So I'm going to start to add some slip trailing decorations onto it. And slip trailing is kind of exactly what the word entails. It's slip that's being used to trail along. So think about like cake decorating. What you're going to do is take that plastic baggy sandwich bag, and you're actually going to put some slip inside of the plastic sandwich bag. And you want to make sure that your slip is a really good consistency, that it's really mixed up pretty well, and it looks like kind of cream or frosting, kind of like the consistency that you would if you've ever done any cake decorating or cookie decorating. And before you actually put the slip into the bag, you want to snip the end just a little bit, just a tiny little bit. It's easier to do this if the hole is smaller, and then you can gradually make it bigger. If you start with it too big, there's not really a way you can make that hole any smaller. So I've made a tiny little hole at the ends, and I'm going to show you kind of what it is. I'm going to hold it, and then I can squeeze that clay out of there, and I can make decorations. So you can experiment with the different types of ways you can use this on your fabric or on your board, just to kind of get the hang of it before you apply it onto your piece. But it doesn't matter, it's not set in stone if you put it on there. You can put stuff on there and then wipe it away afterwards. That's fine. So I am just going to do some small things on here, and you can go really intricate with this, or you can go pretty pretty generic, pretty large actually. So I am just adding some bubbles to the outside. And rather than getting super flowery and decorative, try to think about different ways to make these sorts of lines and patterns to be a little bit more abstracted. Maybe some repetitions and some patterns added to it. So I'm squeezing out more of the slip in some parts, and then I'm squeezing out less of the slip in other parts. And you'll actually do some fabrication with different ideas for what to do. So there's a part that got a little out of control there, so I can take my sponge and actually wipe it away and then start over again on that. A little bit too much came out. And you're gonna want this to set up if you are going to be moving it or turning it to do the other side, because this stuff is gonna wipe away, right? It's gonna take maybe a couple of hours for it to get to the point where it's not that consistency anymore, where it's gonna be easily smeared. So let me try doing some more stuff here. I can do a line. And you want to make sure that your clay is in a leather hard consistency when you add any sort of slip trailing to it. So you can get crazy with this, get pretty fun and intricate things. You can go pretty fast, or you can take your time at it. So I did some markings on the side there. I don't really like those markings. It's kind of all over the place. So you can think about what kinds of designs you can do with this. And while you're thinking about your designs, make sure that they incorporate some sort of meaning behind your sacred container. What do these designs represent? What's inside your container? And how do these designs correlate to the meaning behind your container? Those are the kinds of things you should think about. Maybe I'm doing something that looks kind of drippy, maybe like rain. Maybe the thing inside of the container holds a memory dealing with rain, like being caught in the rain when you have to ride your bike home. So that's slip trailing. I'll let that set up, and then I can add some more details to it. So stay tuned for the next video. I'm going to talk about low relief work. Hello. So before I get started, I wanted to show you some examples of some low relief pieces that I had laying around. So there's our decorations that have been done on cups, and basically the artist has used a carving tool to carve away, to subtract the clay from the piece, creating indentations within the clay piece. So here are a couple of examples of different tools, or not tools, different examples of cups. And the tools, here's another one. some different carving techniques that you can think about. And one more here. This is more of a sculpturally one, and you can see the different kinds of markings that have been added to the piece. Most of this is subtractive, but these little parts here are additive. And if you want to get crazy and want to do some additive parts to your clay box, you can do that. You just have to make sure that it's slipped and scored pretty well and it sticks together. But you can see the different types of carvings that the artist has done in this piece. And the tools you will use to do this are your 2 loop tools that you will use to take out the clay away from the box. So here's my box. I've actually gone ahead and wiped off the slip trailing markings. I'll redo those later. When you're thinking about what to carve or where to carve it, first of all, you should already have your sketches planned out and your ideas planned out before you start to dig into the clay, because it's going to be hard to add clay back to your box. You can use a pin tool to lightly press designs into your box, so you have an idea as to where you're going to be removing the clay and where you're going to be and how much of the clay is going to be removed. So you can add different, maybe I want to take out some parts that look like this, that are kind of like little crescent shapes. Maybe the sacredness in this box has to do with moonlight, and I have drawn part moons on there. So what you can do is you can take your carving tool and use the tip of it to gently start peeling away that clay. And it's going to be a little sticky, so try to like get it off of your tool as much as possible. The thing with this is that you really don't want to have all these little bits hanging out, because they're going to get dry pretty quickly. So try to do your best to keep them collected and together. Another thing to keep in mind is to not dig in too deep when you're doing any sort of relief work. If you dig in too deep, what's going to happen is that it's going to pierce directly through the walls of your box. The walls of your box are about 1/4 of an inch thick, so we really can't be digging in any more than what I've got here. You can see. So we can't really do a whole lot of deep indentations, just pretty light ones. If you do end up poking a hole through your box, what you can do is actually take some of the scrap clay that you've taken off, and you can flatten out like a tiny bit of clay. Doesn't have to be perfect, just a tiny bit of clay, however big the hole is, and then you're going to slip and score this tiny bit of clay over that hole, and then you can eventually go back in and use a modeling tool to press that clay back in so that you can seal that hole up. So I can do some type of relief work, and I can make it more dynamic by adding different layers to it too, because relief isn't necessarily just one flat picture, it's variations of highs and lows. So you can actually sculpt quite a bit of ideas into this if you can get crazy and want to sculpt the whole entire thing in different kinds of relief work. So that is the texture that the round end made. It's a little different than the part that the square end will make. If you really want to get into fine details, you can use the edge of your loop tool, and you can cut a little bit smaller bits. If you're cutting out larger bits, you can use the large lube tool, but be really careful because this large area has a tendency to dig in pretty deep. So be careful with that. You can also use the pointed end as a point and you can carve into it. It's a little trickier to get that though. So that's just how to use the tools. I'm gonna keep working on this and create some really interesting aesthetic for this piece. The next type of surfacing technique I'm gonna go over is gonna be line work. So stay tuned for that. Hey, before I get into the line demo, I wanted to show you something that was happening. I'm getting all of these little clay bits all over the place from my carving. What you can do is take a ball of clay and you can use this ball of clay as a scooper to scoop up all of those bits of clay that are sticking around everywhere. So you're not wasting a whole lot of clay. Even the small parts. It might make your clay more dry, but you can just add some water to it and then put it back in your bag and then it'll reconstitute itself. So that's just about keeping your space clean because it's really, really key to keep your space clean while you're working. So the next thing I'm going to show you is how to do some line work, and I have a little example here of line work. This is a little eyeball here that's been drawn out with some lines, and it's kind of just like how you would expect it to be, is basically using your pen tool to draw different designs into the clay. And you can get pretty crazy with it. You can get pretty, draw representational things, like if you wanted to draw an eyeball, for instance, you can do that. Just make sure whatever you draw on your piece represents what your sacred container represents. So that you're very intentional with the things that you apply. So if you can see, what I'm doing is I'm actually taking it at an angle and pressing it down, because if you take it like directly up and down, you're gonna get little markings. I don't know if you can see this, but there's these little goobers that are coming off of the clay, and I don't want them to pick up off the clay. So if you hold your pen tool at an angle, you can prevent those little bits of clay from rising to the top. If you do get those little bits of clay, what you can do is wait for it to dry a little bit and then use your metal rib to scrape those parts away. And then those parts might end up filling out that hole, so you probably will need to go back in and re-carve it again. So that's something that I'll do. I'll probably do a bunch of line work on the top here and then take my metal rib and then go back over it just to get any of those little clay parts off and then fill those lines back in. That'll make that craftsmanship in those lines that much more nice. Okay, so that's it for this line demonstration. And you don't have to do all of the surface work. You can just choose one of them if you either want to do slip trailing, low relief, or line work. Choose one of them and incorporate that into your box. Okay, thanks for watching.